Okay. Well, my name is Melissa Hook, and I'm the Office Administrator for CSLP. And just a couple of housekeeping things. We ask that please use the chat if you want to chat with each other. If you've got a question for the presenter, you can put that into the Q&A. That should be down on your toolbar. And we'll do our best to answer that. We will be holding questions until the end, and then we'll get to as many of them as we can. After the session, we'll be sending you out a survey and a copy of the slides. And there's also closed captioning available today. That's also down in your toolbar if you need to do anything with that. And I'm here. If you need anything, you can chat to me. And otherwise, I'm going to turn things over to Dawn.
Thanks so much, Melissa. I know many of you, if you're familiar with a collaborative summer library program, have probably at some point emailed or talked with Melissa Hook, who is our champion administrative manager and always on customer service for us. So thank you, Melissa, and our resident webinar expert. So it's great to have you behind the wheel here, so to speak, for today's webinar. I'm so happy that we're all able to come together for this webinar today, courtesy of the Collaborative Summer Library Program and specifically our Inclusion Committee, who has been doing this annually as part of their volunteer duties for CSLP. CSLP, if you're not familiar with it, is volunteer powered. It is really run by a lot of library staff that volunteer their time away from their personal lives and their jobs in order to keep us moving forward with excellent high quality summer reading programming. So I just wanted to let you all know that CSLP, I am the new executive director of CSLP. My name is Dawn Krause. I've been on board since May, so may not have had a chance to meet many of you yet or talk to you behind the scenes, but I hope to in the future. And if you're not familiar with CSLP yet, I hope this is your entree into our service offerings. But we have been around for 36 years. We have a 36-year history. We were started in 1987 by a group of library staff that wanted to share resources around summer reading programming. And we are still that today. So we are a nonprofit organization that's volunteer powered, again, by library staff, for library staff. So I wanted to let you know that we are entering into big season here. Our shop is open. Adventure begins at your library. This is one of our graphics here. I can't figure out which way to point. Adventure begins at your library is going to be our theme for this year, and we're all really excited about it, and we've heard a lot of great feedback so far, and that ties into why we have Ruth Wilson here today. Again, one of our board members, volunteer Deb, had a connection with Ruth recently and suggested that we bring her in for a webinar, and then the Inclusion Committee took over coordinating that. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand it over to the chair of the Inclusion Committee, Abby Chuman. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Deb, for the wonderful connection of connecting us with Dr. Ruth Wilson. I just have an announcement of please use the Q&A if you can. If you have any questions, I will be monitoring that. And I guess to introduce myself, my name is Abby Chuman. I'm the Inclusion Committee Chair for this year and probably next year. And I am now going to read a little short introduction about Dr. Ruth Wilson, and then I will let Ruth do her thing. So her introduction is, Dr. Ruth Wilson worked as an educator for over 30 years with students from preschool through graduate school. She currently works as research library curator for the Children and Nature Network. Ruth has written several books and numerous articles for academic and general audience publications. Her most recent book, Naturally Inclusive, Engaging Children of All Abilities Outdoors, addresses the importance of making outdoor spaces and activities accessible for children with differing abilities. Dr. Wilson has also worked as a curriculum writer and consultant with various organizations, including Sesame Street, California's Education and Environment Initiative, and the Chicago Zoological Society. Ruth's focus on connecting children with nature started in the early 1990s while she was teaching environmental education and special education at Bowling Green State University, in Ohio. Ruth lives in New Mexico, where she enjoys hiking in the land of enchantment. It's all you, Ruth.
All right. Well, I am certainly delighted to be here. Our topics for today are of great interest to me. As Abby said, I've been doing this since the early 1990s. And my plan for today is that we're going to cover 3 different areas. We're going to start with the role of nature in the lives of children. Why is nature so important? What are the benefits? And then we're going to move on to the concept of inclusion and why inclusion is so important. And then finally, we'll look at what some libraries are doing in connecting children with nature. Some of these libraries are actually called Nature Smart libraries. So those are the 3 areas we're going to cover in this short time that we have together. Before I launch into the slides, however, I'd like you to just reflect back to moments in your own childhood when the world for you was exciting. And I choose this way of asking you to reflect back based on the lyrics from Les Mis. Some of you may be familiar with that musical, but there's a line in one of the songs where it goes like this. There was a time when the world was a song and the song was exciting. There's some literature that suggests, actually indicates, that children experience the world of nature in a little bit different way, perhaps, than what we as adults do. And their way of experiencing the world of nature is more exciting. It's based more on the experience of wonder. So I'm just asking each of us to think back to when we had that moment of magic or moment of wonder. When during your childhood did you know the world to be exciting? Usually when I ask this question, I get answers like, answers related to something outdoors and something that had adventure to it. So the idea of a summer reading program around the idea of nature fits with what is so much of a part of a child's life. Let me just say a few words about what brought me to looking at children with differing abilities and the world of nature. I'm sure a lot of it goes back to when I was a child growing up with 2 older brothers. My brother Jim, the oldest of the 2, had Tourette's syndrome. We didn't know the name of it at the time. We just knew Jim was different, that he definitely had differing needs. He was not walking or talking at the age of 2. And just thinking back to his experiences as a child, I would have to say they were not happy experiences. Jim was not, he didn't have friends like my other older brother. Jim did not belong to any Boy Scouts or 4-H or was member of a sports team. That was not a part of his life. He was never included in those kinds of activities. He dropped out of school at the age of 16. He was already in the 8th grade as a 16-year-old. And his school experience was generally sitting in the back of the room, basically being ignored. Teachers weren't sure what to do in terms of meeting his needs. So I saw my brother growing up excluded from many activities that my other siblings could enjoy. And today I still get sad thinking about his life, his childhood. Then there's another story that brought me to talk about and write about the inclusion of children with differing abilities. And this is when I was already a teacher, a special education teacher. But I was driving across state to a conference, and I stopped at just a roadside park. A school bus drove up into the park a little bit later, and I watched as the kids got off the bus. They must have been about third graders. They were talking, laughing, just kind of jumping around as they got off the bus. An adult walked over to a picnic table. She was carrying a picnic basket. The children eagerly ran over to the table with her. But then another child, using braces, was getting off the bus with another adult next to her. And I could just faintly hear the adult saying, now be careful, hold the bar, watch the step. And this adult helped the child get off of the bus safely. The two of them, this little girl and the assistant, walked over to a separate picnic table. This little child with the braces and the adult with her, her assistant, sat at the table by themselves and had their lunch. The other children were all together having fun at other tables. So we would look at this and say, well, that child was included. She came along on the bus. She was a part of the field trip. She was there with the other children. We might say there was physical inclusion. She was indeed at the park. She indeed did ride the bus with the other children, but we know that's not inclusion as long as she is socially separated. And I'm sure she was also emotionally separated. She would not have felt included. So when we talk about inclusion, we're going to think about it in the larger sense. All right, as Abby mentioned, I do work with the Children in Nature Network Research Library, and I've been doing this for 6 years. And here again is an area where I notice there's not a lot of attention to children with differing abilities. I've read in the last 6 years, I'm sure, at least 1,400 studies showing the benefits of nature engagement for kids. Some of the studies do include children with special needs, but it's usually not the focus. It's just sort of an afterthought. So again, in the literature, in a library, a research library with over 1,400 studies, there's just not a lot there about children with differing abilities, what they might gain from engagement with nature, or how to facilitate their inclusion in programs connecting children with nature. So that was another incentive for me to write this last book. And do we have a slide? Who's doing my slides?
I just asked Melissa to bring them up, so.
Oh,
yeah,
there we
there you
are.
go.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So this latest book, it is titled Naturally Inclusive, Engaging Children of All Abilities Outdoors. It does have my name on the cover as the author, but I have to let you know, I had many therapists, teachers, parents, others sharing their stories. When they heard that I wanted to write this book, they reached out to me about the importance of their stories being told, because there's the opposite story about, well, it's hard to include children with special needs when you're out in nature where things are sometimes unpredictable. Sometimes they get a little messy. You know, it might rain or snow. It might be windy. It might be cold. So there are some challenges. And these contributors to the book said they want the story to be told that it works. So we're going to move on to the next slide, which is going to say, okay, so what is it about nature? Why should we focus so much on that? And I do have 5 points here about why is nature so important? Why am I focusing on this instead of, or maybe looking at some other aspect of what we might be doing with children with differing abilities? Well, we can start with us as humans. We are a species on planet Earth where nature has been for how many years our natural habitat. We can look at other parts of living things in nature and see they do best when they're in their natural habitat. That's where they thrive. Well, we're humans, we're a species on planet Earth. Nature is our natural habitat. And for many, many years, it was this very close engagement with the natural world that allowed us to survive and thrive. So it is only natural that nature is a place that fosters our development. Another reason why nature is emotional reasons. We have an affinity. It's natural, it's built in for the rest of the natural world. Many of us just know this. We might not have all known the word biophilia, but we've known we're drawn to the world of nature. We're drawn to planting gardens, to bird watching, to choosing vacations that are in more of a natural area. We really like to take vacations along the beach, or maybe in a more wooded area where there are, just fascinating things to watch in terms of wildlife. So we feel it within ourselves, this natural affinity for the rest of the natural world. And children probably feel it more than we do, because we have lived longer building walls against our daily life and the world of nature. And a third reason why nature, well, it's one of the ways we know about the natural world, or the world around us. There is something called a naturalistic intelligence. It's one of our ways of knowing, just like we have the more cognitive or analytical ways of learning about the world. We also have that naturalistic intelligence. And again, everybody has it. All children, adults, with and without differing abilities. We have a naturalistic intelligence. So it's natural for us to be drawn to nature. Then there's the goodness of fit between what nature offers, and we sometimes call that affordances of nature, and then what children need and want. Affordances, another word for that would be like gifts. Some people would say it's the characteristics of nature. I like the word gifts. Nature offers certain things that children are drawn to, and so are we. We love the sounds, the colors, the experiences, the texture of nature. So between children and what the world of nature has to offer, it's just a goodness of fit. And nature is also an exemplar of diversity and a catalyst for inclusion. We can look at a forest or another ecosystem, and we see that there's a lot of diversity there. And things work better if we honor that diversity. If we don't start taking little parts away from it, it will work better. We might say, well, that's a catalyst for inclusion. If you take things out or keep things from being a part of, you diminish the integrity of the whole. So nature itself is just an example of what is best for us. Sometimes at the Children in Nature Network, and we want to simplify all this research that we have, the research that comes from educators and doctors and mental health professionals and landscape architects, and all of this research, we say it can be overwhelming. If you want to boil it down to how nature helps children, we sometimes say, well, nature helps children, and of course adults as well, to be healthier. It contributes to their physical health. Nature helps children to be happier. It contributes to their emotional health. Nature helps children be smarter. It actually helps children pay closer attention. It fosters their attentional skills. Children going to schools where there's more greenery around the school, they tend to do better academically. Nature helps children be smarter because it kind of wakes up their curiosity and it motivates them to learn about it. And nature helps children to be better stewards of the environment. Once they get to know it, they tend to appreciate it and want to take care of it. So to simplify it, we could say nature helps children be healthier, happier, smarter, and better stewards of the environment. And of course, nature promotes all areas of development, the physical, the emotional, the cognitive. We would even say the spiritual part of the child, that part that just knows there's something awesome about the world in which we live. There are some of the benefits that nature offers that we really can't exactly measure, but we feel it, we know it. Things like joy. We as adults, we find joy in nature when the birds come to our bird feeder, when that plant that we've been nurturing finally produces fruit. We find the joy. Sometimes we find solace. Sometimes we may even get that sense of belonging, like nature doesn't put judgments on us. Nature is what nature is and treats all of us the same. So we may even get that sense of belonging or sense of inclusion. Let's move on to the next slide. And again, this goes back to that goodness of fit, of what children need and want. I have, pulled from 3 different studies in the research library where children were actually asked questions about what they need and want. The first study asked the children, what do you like about your school or your experience at school? And these were some of the children's answers. Big green trees with leaves, branches, and apples. Another child likes the raindrops, the stones, the sand, and the birds. And of course, children like playing with friends. Well, that last line was more the researchers' summary of what the children were saying. The children like risk-taking. When they are outdoors, or probably in almost any setting, they do like to take risks. That's a part of the adventure. They also like coziness. They like to know there's a place where they can feel safe and comfortable. And they also want autonomy. They want to make some of their own decisions. And that goodness of fit, nature allows them to do that in a way that sometimes the rules of adults don't allow. The second study asked children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, what makes life really good for you? Now, children with ADHD, they do face challenges that often may make them feel bad about themselves or feel bad because somebody is telling them they're not paying attention, they're not doing things the way they're supposed to. So when they were asked, well, what makes your life really good? Most of them referred to things or described things where it involved outdoor activities with others. Outdoors, that's where they found joy and happiness. And the third study, it was focused specifically on children with differing needs and what they need and want. And again, these may not be the children's words, but it's what the researchers pulled from what the children were saying. They want to feel welcomed and they want to feel safe, but that feeling safe also means emotionally safe. So they don't want to be left out. They don't want to be teased. They want to belong. They want that inclusion that includes the emotional part of inclusion. And they want to play with the other kids, not just watch. I've seen too many pictures of inclusion where a child in a wheelchair or a child with braces, they're basically on the sideline watching. And that might be interesting, but they want more than that. They want to play with, they want to be actively engaged with the other children. They also want to take risks like the other kids. In this particular study, the one child said something about, I see the other kids climbing really high and running fast. I want to do that too. So they do not want to be protected. They want to be really engaged with the others. Well, let's move on to the next slide, where there's a little bit more about what do we mean by affordances. And again, I call them the gifts, things in nature that children can use, enjoy, learn from, and it doesn't have to be over the top things. Sticks, rocks, water, leaves, small animals. These are affordances of the natural environment that attract children to do something, not just to watch it, to do. And that visual on the right side of the slide with the leaf and the raindrops, that just reminds me of what one of the fun things I did as a kid. I grew up in Ohio, and after a rain, to go out under the cherry trees, which some of the branches were kind of low, and just shake the leaves and let the water come down like a spray. That was the trees and the water offering an affordance for me to have a little bit of fun. Well, so the affordances provide invitations to explore. What will happen if I shake the leaves? What will happen if I turn the log over? What will I find? Those kind of invitations are there in the natural world in a much richer way than in the world of toys. Nature's affordances provide those sensory rich experiences. The way things smell, the way things feel, the way things taste. They invite children for all kinds of fun things to do: the wading, the splashing, the digging, the building, climbing, and of course that risk-taking, trial and error. Let's experiment, problem solving, cooperation, and different forms of play. And that last one, a lot of research on nature play shows that when children are playing in a natural environment, their play is more diverse than on the traditional playground. Their play is also more social. And each episode of play, whatever they're engaged in, tends to last longer. So the play through which children learn so much, the natural environment offers these rich affordances. Let's move on. And again, this is just a summary of what the research says about the benefits of nature engagement. So if you need to write a grant to bring more nature into your programs, the research library will give you multiple studies to show that in every area of child development, nature provides the affordances, the incentives, the pathways to each of these different ways that children will benefit. And you'll notice something I haven't mentioned before: joint attention. And that's a part of that social development of children. They find something interesting, they want to share it with somebody else. And I recall when I was a teacher educator and visiting an early childhood program that was an inclusive program. I had a student teacher there, so I was coming to just observe the student teacher. I got there early in the morning as some of the children were just arriving. And the one mother came with her daughter, and this particular little girl had this, I think it was March when I came. This child had never spontaneously spoken in the classroom to either the teacher or the other children. The day I was there, when the mother brought her in, she walked over to a table where there was an incubator with eggs. She walked over to that table, and at that time, one of the baby chicks was pecking its way out of the egg. That little girl ran back to her mother, to the teacher, and pointed and said, "Look." That child was so excited about what she had just observed. She pulled us over to that table. This was joint attention. She wanted us to see the excitement that she just experienced. And we see that in simpler things as well. One child discovers that worm under the log, or maybe the strawberry on the plant that wasn't there yesterday. They want to show it. They want to bring others' attention to it. And that joint attention is such an important part of communication and social development. And another very important part of child development, of course, is empathy and just engagement with animals, plants, those living things. It tends to promote caring on the part of the child. We better move on to the next one, because now we're going to talk specifically about children with differing abilities and how they experience nature. For example, Helen Keller, deaf and blind from about the age of 3. So her access to the natural world would have different limitations or challenges than what we have. We can receive more sensory input than what Helen Keller was able to do after she could no longer hear or see. But if you remember watching The Miracle Worker, when Helen finally realized that her teacher was using signing, spelling the words in her hand, it happened at the water at the pump. It did not happen when the teacher was trying to spell maybe like chair or brush, hairbrush, because I remember in the movie seeing the teacher trying to get Helen to make the connection. What I'm doing in your hand says the word for what you see. It never worked until the one day at the water pump. And was it that rich sensory experience of the water, the sound coming out of the pump, the feel of it, because Helen's hand was in the water. It was at that moment she made the connection. Oh, there's a word for this. And then later, of course, as Helen learned more about the natural world, she wrote about experiences. She wrote about the ecstatic mornings of just wandering in the fields. She was experienced the sensory input of nature in a very, very deep way, even though some of her senses were not as tuned in as ours might be. So she describes the delicate tremble of a butterfly's wings, the soft petals of violets, the velvet of a rose. She was very, very tuned in to the world of nature in a different way. And that's the thing is that we're talking about children with differing abilities. And again, let's move on to the next one. This slide, some of you may be familiar with, but I included it here. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And right in the middle, you'll see social belonging. So we've talked about the importance of nature for children, what nature offers children. Let's zero in on that belonging piece. Why inclusion? That yes, a child with special needs can enjoy, benefit from nature on their own, and sometimes that's the best way. But that social belonging is also such an important part of their experience of the world. Belonging isn't something that you have to earn. It isn't something that you have to first gain certain skills. It's a right. It's a right that is not only your basic right, but it's a basic need. That's why Maslow called it one of the basic needs of humans that need to be met before you can get to that apex, the self-realization. So belonging is just key to what children need. And that's why I'm so delighted with your focus on inclusiveness. And so we see what Maslow, a psychologist, is telling us about the importance of belonging. We might also look at what some parents and teachers tell us. I'm thinking especially of one child who, and this story is in the book, the mother said he had very severe sensory difficulties, that putting his hand in sand, for example, it was almost like repulsive to him. He would never walk barefoot in the grass. He didn't like the feel of mud or stones, of things in the natural world. There's a picture in the book of the mother trying to convince him, just feel the sand. And he's there, he's looking. But then they go home, and later the mother sees the child next door, a little girl, is making mud pies, and her son is watching. He eventually joins her, and they make mud pies together. So he wasn't doing it on his own, but once there was somebody there, a child, another child, he joined her and was able to overcome whatever that aversion was, because it was somebody his age. Obviously, they had seen each other, known each other. They were next door neighbors. So that just, I guess, is a testament to the power of social belonging. And again, let's move on. And we're going to look at the next slide. Oh, I forgot. This is one that says when children in the past were not included, children with differing abilities. I read this article. It was in the Atlantic, and it was titled, "The Ones We Sent Away." And the picture that you see there, of course, it's a mother and father, a little girl, and then the silhouette of a little girl. The article in the Atlantic was written by Jennifer Senior. She is one of the writers for the Atlantic. And she said that picture of the girl that is there, that's her mother. But her mother had a sister that Jennifer never knew about. So it would have been Jennifer's aunt. She didn't know about this aunt because she had been sent away to an institution when she was about 2 years old. This child had been born with special needs. The doctor had said this child will never really develop normally. The child will not really be able to contribute to your family life. You should have her put in an institution where she will be cared for. She won't be harmed, but it would be a better place than if she stayed with the family. So they did send her away. Later, after Jennifer found out about her aunt, she wanted to meet her aunt. And they did go to where her aunt lived. And the aunt was there, and she was doing some artwork. I think it was weaving. She was singing. She was smiling. So now, as an adult, they could see she was having quality of life. Not that the institution was the best place for her, but what happened to all those childhood years? And this was not uncommon many, many years ago, that if you are different because of differing abilities, the message was you don't belong. So the focus was on the deficit versus on meeting the belonging needs. Fortunately, my brother Jim was not sent away, but still he did not have that belonging because, again, at that time in society, the understanding, the thinking focused more on the deficits versus the abilities. Let's move to the next slide. And you'll see a picture of Nate. Now, Nate was also born with special needs. He was certainly not sent away. His shirt tells his story. I'm different, but I'm not broken. He's not afraid to wear the shirt. His family's not afraid to have him wear the shirt. They want people to recognize Nate for the abilities that he does have. So this is Nate. And his mother describes how being out in nature is one place where he is the happiest. Move on to the next slide, and you'll see Nate when he was younger. His story is also in the Naturally Inclusive book, where the mother, Krista, talks about one of the things Nate liked to do was to take sticks and wrap them in different material to make them sparkly sticks. Now, we might say, well, that's not typical normal behavior to walk around with sparkly sticks, but it was fun for Nate. And other children joined in his play because he was so positive about it. His parents were so positive about it. Nature for Nate was a place where he could really be himself. And the next slide is going to show you Leela. And Leela was another child born with many special needs. I just got a note. I'm gonna have to go through this rather fast, but Leela is just amazing, and her parents' story about Leela. Both Leela and Nate attended a special program for children who are deaf. This program is in New Mexico. It started with Fridays in the Forest. So the teacher, Sally Anderson, worked as the teacher with the preschool children who are deaf. And she is also a certified forest therapist. And so she said, one of the things that would really be helpful for the kids is take them outdoors, take them into the forest. So she did. Every Friday, the class would go out to the forest. And this Leela just blossomed. That's where she really was motivated to learn sign language. This is where she really motivated to use her body. So she developed physically, she developed socially and emotionally. The same thing happened for Nate. But Leela's mother, Ellison, says Leela got so much more out of the forest than what we might put down on a progress report, that Leela also got so in tune with the natural world that it's not just she plays in nature and learns in nature. The mother describes it as it's with nature and says this is a gift that Leela was able to impart to the rest of the family, so that nature for the whole family became a place where that had a therapeutic impact on them. That, of course, having a child with differing abilities, there are challenges, there are stressors. But the mother explained once they went out into the natural world, watch Leela be with nature, so much of that stress just dissipated. Let's move on to the next slide. And again, you'll see Leela here, very curious child. She might not know all of the scientific aspects of nature, but she's curious. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What can I do with it? And again, the next slide, you'll see Leela a little bit older, snowshoeing in the mountains in New Mexico. And the mother said she feels pictures like this are so important to show that children with differing needs love to do, want to do, and can do so much of what other children do. We do need to move on to the next slide. I'm going to soon begin to talk about what some libraries are doing. Now here, this is not a library program, but it is a program for children with differing abilities, but also has children, typically developing children. Here's an activity that is teacher-led. It's listening to the trees. And let's move to the next one. You see how the children are engaged. Not all activities need to be teacher-directed. Here's a child at the same program, walking through the leaves, listening to the crunch, obviously enjoying just being who she is in that natural world around her. And the next slide, this is Sierra. She is now, I believe, about 12 or 13 by the time when she was 11, and she's deaf. She was already giving lectures, I'm going to call it lectures, testimony to the state legislature about the concern she had for climate change. The point is, don't underestimate the children with special needs. She's an activist and was from a very young age. Even though she's deaf, she gets her message across through her enthusiasm and her abilities that she's developed. But one of the things, she's definitely a climate activist, but she's also a lover of nature. She talks about loving the being in the mountains and loving and being near water, the creeks, the rivers, the lakes. She loves the delicious smell of warm pine forest, the breathing in of the fresh air. She's just an amazing. So the thing is, don't underestimate what they can and want to do. Now for some ideas about libraries and what they can and are doing. We'll move on to the next slide. Oh, that's one of Sierra's pieces of art. I think she did that when she was about 9. And again, move on. This is what one of the teachers did as a more sensory experience for children with special needs. These children were visually impaired. So this teacher made their paper bags. Each one has texture, something that has a texture to it. Each child would take a bag and find things in nature through just feeling, through touching. And if it felt like what was attached to the bag, they could put it inside. So this is one type of thing that can be done for children with without sight. I don't know how they might be encouraged to use their more sense of feel. And moving on, here's the idea from a book. So we have the Leaf Man, and the next slide shows what one of the librarians did. It's cover the book or the pages of the book with this clear plastic, and then take real materials from the natural world and attach it. So a child who may not be drawn to the book just because of the pictures or the words, the actual materials, the actual natural elements. They could feel it, they could see it. Some cases they might be able to smell it. And moving on to the next one. This is, some of you may be familiar with the story walk, where a children's book, usually if it's outdoors, it's about nature. So taking the pages of the book, reproducing them, protecting them, attaching them to different places outdoors. And so the children, maybe an adult or a teacher, librarian, walks with them, read the story. It gets the children outside. It gets them seeing the connection between the book and the natural world. So here's one that obviously was homemade by one of the librarians. Move on to the next slide, and you'll see a much more formal book walk. So it is permanent exhibit of the book, pages of the book, and the children and adults walking around outdoors to read the book. And the next slide again shows you a very simple version of that same idea. Well, I believe we are getting out of time, but the last few slides will just show you some of the resources. If you look on the Children and Nature website, and it's childrenandnature.org, you will find stories about nature smart libraries. And as Abby said, you will have access to these slides. So you'll want to look that up. The first Nature Smart library that I know of was the Sunray Library in St. Paul, Minnesota. And they have nature adventure backpacks that you can check out. They have developed, I think, about 50 environmental activities that youth can take outdoors or do outdoors. They have a pollinator garden. They have nature clubs. They do nature art programs. Let's move on to the next slide. And this is another resource that is recently been developed by the Children and Nature Network, and it's about nature play and therapeutic gardens. And you get all kinds of information if you go to that particular toolkit. And the next one is a recent research digest that we did, focusing specifically on children with differing abilities. The research library every month does a themed digest, and in September we did one on children with different needs. And the next two slides This one is another toolkit that you might take a good look at. And the last one is about the Seattle Play Garden. They too have a phenomenal program and toolkit. So I highly encourage you to use these resources, see what other places are doing. When it comes to libraries, I just spoke to the coordinator of children's services at San Antonio Libraries. They recently hosted a conference of people from libraries across the country on how to be a nature smart library. And Crescentia told me that one of their smartest things they did was to team up with the Parks Department, with the city's Parks Department. So they do a lot of programming outdoors in the city parks. And she said, when they look at the city parks, two things they look for: how natural is it? How accessible is it? So I highly encourage you to look at these resources and then jump right in and connect the children with nature. Again, I know we're running short on time, so maybe we'll just jump into some questions.
Absolutely. You have a couple questions here. The first one is, what are some safety measures practitioners need to be aware of when hosting public programming outdoors with children? Parents will probably most likely be in attendance, but what should we be aware of or prepared for?
Well, from my conversation with the coordinator of children's services in San Antonio, she said one thing that surprised them was some of the parents have disabilities, and they may have more mobility issues than the children. So to keep that in mind, it was a surprise to them. They had not anticipated that. So just to lay that out first. But when it comes to safety, I believe the tendency is to get too concerned about safety rather than not concerned enough. Actually, the traditional playgrounds are probably more unsafe than a lot of the more natural play spaces. If it's just children, or if it is like an all-day program and there's a concern that some of the children might drift off and get lost, if you're going to use a specific area all the time, you may want to have it fenced in, and then the gate to it actually have like a bell or some kind of sensor on it. So if there is a child that goes out, you would know. Of course, a safety guideline is to always be observant. You do want children to have those cozy places where they think you can't see them, those hiding places. But we know we have to be aware of where the children are at all times. I don't know if that answered your question enough, but that's my best shot at it right now.
All right, there's a second question in here, and it's, are there any further training opportunities or reading material that you would recommend for those interested in hosting more outdoor programming at their library?
I would say that toolkit developed by the Children in Nature Network will give you a list of readings. There is a resource list in that toolkit, and it's quite extensive. So that would be the first place that I would go to. There's also programming through the Natural Learning Initiative. And I believe they do a lot of webinars. If you look up Natural Learning Initiative, and they do have a lot of guidelines as well about safety. They've helped develop many natural play spaces in public spaces. So that would be a place to look. And I think it's just nli.org. Yes.
Okay, great. I don't see any more questions at this time. We can give people a couple extra minutes if they have any questions. But a lot of people are saying thank you. This was wonderful. I learned a lot, which is awesome.
The Seattle Children's Play Garden, that is a public play space. And I've not been able to visit it myself, but I've heard so many wonderful stories about that play space, very inclusive. And they do have that toolkit that is also amazing. I believe they also offer webinars. So that is something to check out. And the Children in Nature Network will have their annual conference in May. I think it's in Atlanta. And they almost always have something about children with differing abilities. Because part of the mission is to make nature accessible for all. And that's one thing with libraries, have that opportunity. You are public programs, and that anybody can benefit from the services.
That's awesome. Kathy asks, what is your favorite inclusive outdoor activity?
I really love the child-led activities, joining the children, watching what they do and joining them. That seems to be, I think, more productive than many teacher-led activities. In fact, the library in San Antonio, they told me they started out more adult-directed, and they soon found out that children are so much more engaged if you follow the children's interest. And of course, this is younger children primarily, but even the primary elementary age children. Give them the time, the place, the materials. Join them.
I have one more question right now, and it's, if you had a wonderful outdoor space, what would you create in it for the children to enjoy and explore?
I would definitely create spaces that invite animals. The animals might be ants, snails, birds, but children are fascinated by animals. They're also very interested in things that grow. So if they can see from the seed to the little plant, if they can see the strawberry plant that produces the berry. So it's things that are really have a lot of sensory aspects to it, like that strawberry. But the animals, and in the talking about affordances, animals are sometimes forgotten. And children want to do more than just watch the animal inside a cage. They want to observe much more closely. They want to help take care of it. So they may never touch the bird, but they can help clean the bird bath.
One last question. How do you get the word out to those that you provide these programs, to those who would actually benefit from them?
How do we get the word out? I know of one family nature club that was started here in New Mexico. It was in Albuquerque. And it started out very small with a few staff members at the open space visitor center and a few parents. But once they got started, it was really by word of mouth, the parents telling other parents. So there was a lot of excitement, and then they just wanted to share it with others. So even in that encouraging people to tell each other. And of course, things get shared so quickly through the internet. Those are excellent questions. And I bet a lot of you have answers better than I do.
All right, it looks like we're coming up on 3 o'clock. Dawn, do you have any closing things?
Thank you so much, Ruth, for taking the time to do this for us. Excellent information going into Adventure and our programming for 2024. And Abby, thank you, and the Inclusion Committee as well, and Melissa for managing the back end. We will be sending out a short evaluation of the event. So if you'll give us feedback, we always appreciate that. If you'd like to see more of these kinds of webinars from CSLP, we would love to know what type. If you have suggestions for speakers as well, please let us know. And then we'll also get the recording uploaded to YouTube, and we'll get that out to everyone that registered as soon as we can. So I just want to say farewell, and thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ruth.